Professor, thank you for joining us on Go Open. Let's dive straight into it. You're known as the father of the Creative Commons. How did you come up with the idea of creating that?
Well, the Creative Commons was actually the idea of Eric Eldred, who is a very important web publisher in the United States, publishing material in the public domain. And what he was concerned about was that increasing copyright restrictions were making it harder for people to make material accessible, even material that has no commercial value at all, but is important to our culture and to our past. So he was eager to build a foundation out of which we could support building the opportunities for people to make material available for others to be able to share or build upon as the author wishes.
Why do you say you're taking traditional copyright into account? Why is it so much more difficult compared to Creative Commons?
Well, traditional copyright was written in the 19th and 20th century for a very different world, a very different technology. It's written imagining that you've got a bunch of lawyers following you around who are able to clear the rights and to make sure all permissions have been secured. And of course, for most creators in the context of the internet, that's a pretty useless type of protection, because most creators in the context of the internet can't afford something like lawyers who are in the business of clearing rights. So our objective was, let's find a way to make the system function cheaper, more simply, but respecting the underlying copyright. So that's the objective of Creative Commons, to get the lawyers out of the way, but to still respect the underlying rights that the copyright law gives to authors.
Now, authors and musicians, producers who go under Creative Commons, do they now have, should we say, equal legal protection using Creative Commons?
They have absolutely the same legal protection. Both Creative Commons and traditional copyright builds on top of the property right called copyright that the law gives the author. The difference between the two is that the Creative Commons license marks the content with the freedoms that the author intends the content to carry. So if you're an author and you don't mind people remixing your work, building on your work to make new work, you can mark your content in that way so that other creators coming across your work know that they're allowed to remix it, to extend it, and to build upon it without needing to get your permission first. Or if you're an author who doesn't mind that people are allowed to get access to share content with your work, you can mark it so people know they're allowed to share it without fearing that they'll be sued by some lawyers organization who believes that they violated the copyrights. So we just want to make the system easier so that the power of the network to enable people from around the world to participate in this creative activity could actually be realized.
Did Richard Stallman's general public license have any influence in the Creative Commons license?
Oh, totally. We stole Richard Stallman's idea and built it in the context of culture. What Richard did 20 years ago, in 1984, was to build a movement called the Free Software Movement, which was designed to use copyright law to guarantee that software would be accessible broadly for people to build upon, to share, to modify, and to learn from. And we took that same idea and extended it in the context of culture. Now, the issues in the context of creative works like music and film are a little bit different sometimes. So we couldn't take exactly the same license and just extend it in this context. But what we've done is create a range of licenses that are all designed to change the default regime that exists right now. Right now the regime is all rights reserved. If you want to do anything, ask permission first, and if you don't, you are a pirate. We want to change that regime to a regime where authors can make it easy for people to understand the freedoms they have with the content, so that it becomes much easier for a wider range of people from Brazil to South Africa to Asia to be able to take content, remix it, spread it broadly without being called pirates for doing that.
Can you make money if you publish under a Creative Commons license?
Yeah. In fact, there have been many stories written, most recently in a publication called Business 2.0 in the United States, demonstrating how this more flexible licensing system actually makes it easier for certain kinds of creators to make more money. And I myself, when I published my latest book called Free Culture, my publisher, Penguin Press, suggested we release the book free online under a Creative Commons license at the same time that the book was being sold in bookstores. Now what that did was increase the demand for the book because a wider range of people got access to it. Over 500,000 people downloaded the book. And most people don't want to read a book on a computer, so that actually increased the number of sales of the book. But much more importantly to me, it made it easy for the ideas in the book to be spread broadly across the world, and there are projects to translate it in Croatia and in Poland and in many places that never would have had access to these ideas before. So the point was, by enabling a freer license, by enabling people to engage, you actually supported the underlying business model, which was to sell more books. And I think more people will recognize this, and as they do, they'll dial down the extreme kind of obsessive protection of copyright law right now to a more reasonable balance that will actually benefit them.
Professor Lessig, let's talk more about free culture, the book that you wrote. How do you describe free culture?
Well, we have this intuition in many other contexts: free markets, free elections, free society, free speech. In none of those contexts is anybody confused about whether there's such a thing as property. You know, free markets doesn't mean there's no property. Free speech doesn't give me the right to go into the New York Times and demand access to their op-ed page. What freedom means is not anarchy. Freedom means a balance between proper regulation and lots of access and freedom to build upon the particular domain in which you're speaking. So I think free culture needs to stand next to free speech and free society and free markets as an important idea about what freedom means in this generation. Because what we've seen is an incredible amount of our culture corporatized, owned by entities, not even authors, owned by corporations that have a very particular interest in how they want culture to develop. Now, I'm not against them. I'm happy that the Disney Corporation has its own ability to make money using its bits of culture. But I am concerned that the only people who can build and spread culture are those that are tied to some very powerful corporate interests. So my aim in this movement is to try to get people to recognize that freeing up our culture so that people using the technologies of the internet can criticize it and extend it and expand it or transform it is an essential part of what human freedom is. It's what we've always been able to do before the internet came along. You've always been free to remix culture without worrying about how the state was going to prosecute you for it. Now that technology gives us the power to do it much more powerfully and cheaply, we ought to have the same freedoms that we had before.
There was a story with regards to Disney and how they wanted to extend the copyright with regards to the brand Mickey Mouse. Can you take us through that a bit?
Well, in the United States in particular, our Congress has gotten into a pretty unbreakable habit of extending the term of existing copyrights. It's done it 11 times in the last 40 years. The most recent time was the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, which was passed in 1998 and extended the term of existing copyrights by 20 years. Now, this was pushed by the Disney Corporation and other very famous copyright owners who were about to see their copyrights pass into the public domain. So they desired to extend the term of copyright, and they concocted these extraordinary, elaborate stories about why it was necessary. So, in fact, they pushed in Europe to get Europe to extend the terms of copyright, and then they came to the United States and they said, well, we've got to extend the terms because Europe has extended the terms. But the dynamic here is not hard to understand. A very small percentage of creative material continues to have commercial value after just 20 years of creativity. In the Supreme Court, Justice Breyer estimated that 98% of the material affected by this copyright term extension has no continuing commercial value at all. Yet to benefit the 2%, Congress continues to extend the term of copyrights. Now, I'm not against Disney being benefited from this, although I don't think it's consistent with our Constitution. But the real loss here is for the other 98%. Because when we want to use digital technologies to spread our culture, to spread our past, to make it accessible, to make it so people around the world can understand and build upon our past, the idea that you've got to hire copyright lawyers before you can do that totally destroys the potential of this network to spread and enable the building of culture. And so it changes the opportunity of the internet. And so our fight against copyright term extensions was really a fight against the unnecessary and totally unintended effect that these extensions have on the opportunity for the network to be used to spread and build culture.
A lot of people would say that the characters that the Disney Corporation use, they've in fact borrowed other cultures. You take Cinderella, Snow White, Mulan, then do they have less of a case to maintain those copyrights?
Well, I'm a great fan of Walt